Greetings ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to today's Reddit series video from the subreddit HFY, called Children of the Gun Chapter 3, written by Alt-Cypher. You know, Diego said, I've spent half my life on ships going from one hellhole to another, but I've never felt comfortable knowing that on the other side of this hull was an endless pit of hyperspace that isn't supposed to exist. He placed his hand on the outer wall of the ship. You think too much, Cal said. He wiped down the gun parts laid out on the table in front of him. He inspected each piece carefully and examined them for any signs of damage or wear. The table gently rattled as the ship wove its way between the stars. I suppose, Diego said. He had his sidearm disassembled in front of him on the table, his actions a mirror of Cal's as they both cleaned their weapons. I wish I could turn it off like you. Cal smiled as he laid down a heavy metal component on a dull thud. You should talk to Lee. She'll doubt that I ever turn my brain on. Is she over it? Cal's smile died on his lips. No, not really. For months afterwards it was like every time I looked in her eyes, all I saw was a stranger. At least now I can tell that there's a person behind the eyes. She's not just running on autopilot anymore. I think it broke me, Diego said, but destroyed her. It destroyed all of us, Cal said. He began reassembling the weapon with the care of a lioness tending to a cub. Each piece slid home almost silently, each component fitted into its exact position. I heard you guys took up cargo runs, Diego said. A few, yeah, Cal said. Even though Lee was going through some stuff, we still had bills to pay. We stuck with bed space, though. We wouldn't even listen to a job that we'd have to go outside. I know how she feels, Diego said. What about you? What have you been up to? Nothing. I had a little savings and my pension. I only have one real set of skills, and I wasn't looking to use them, Diego said, as he reassembled his own weapon as well. So why'd you come back? Trig, Diego said. He asked me and, well, I'm here. He give you the same speech about balancing the ledger? Diego smiled. Yeah, he did. I've missed this. Not this, the job, but the people. I haven't been able to face anyone in forever. Guess I forgot what it was like to have someone to talk to. Someone who knows what it's like. Trig flipped through the data displays in a small alcove that was given a grandiose name of Situation Room. There was barely enough space for 3 grown humans in here, and he always felt the name was more a marketing ploy on the ship's designers than an actual usable room. Even being in there made his blood pressure rise because he couldn't stop thinking about the name. Star charts coasted across the screens, and he heard the door open behind him and soft footfalls make their way to him. Good afternoon, Trig, Eddie said. Afternoon, Eddie. What's up? I was unable to find our captain. Can you tell me how much longer we've got in this trip? About a week and a half. We're only halfway, Trig said. He cycled back through the star charts and brought up their current course. A bright green dot popped into existence, and a solid blue line traced its way with a blinking purple dot. The line only reached about halfway between the green and purple dots. Ah, Eddie said. I see. The trip from my world seemed much shorter. It probably was. Those big liners can make much better time than this ship, but we were able to get started earlier, so we should arrive long before the commercial transport would have. I worry for my people. It seems I've been gone forever, and I fear of what we'll find when I return. The Lapex are a terrible enemy. Trig sat back in his chair and turned to Eddie. What can you tell me about them? We can't find anything in our databases about them, and I don't like going in blind. I understand. Unfortunately, there's little I can add. We do not know from where they came from, and we do not understand why they are attacking us. We had tried communicating with them, but, I came to find you. I see. Anything else? Anything may end up being the thing between winning and losing, Trig said. Eddie thought for a moment and said, The Lepacs are nightmares made real. They are fear. Fear on 2 legs. We are a peaceful race and have little in the way of weapons, but we did have was a useless. What does that mean? Useless. Arrows would not pierce their hide. They shrugged off our stunners with our paws. One village tried to set a trap with falling logs, but the Lepak's troops walked away with minimal scratches and bruises. We simply were not equipped to fight them. How big are they? Well, you have to understand that most species seem like giants to us. Humans are twice our size. The Lepaks are larger than humans, it seems. I would guess that they are maybe 3 times our size. It's difficult to say, Hetty said. Trig nodded as she spoke. He said, and their weapons, what are those like? We have no knowledge of such a thing. The one weapon I saw was a long dark tube with handles hanging off of it. It seemed small in the hands, but I would guess that it would reach up my shoulder or just past your waist. When they fired those weapons, there was a terrible screeching noise like a wallaringa bird in attack. A flash of light followed, and then death, Hetty said. A flash of light. What color was it? Orange, I suppose. Maybe a little yellow, Hetty said. Trig turned back to the console and called up a number of weapon catalogs. He scrolled through some weapon catalogs until he came across a likely candidate. Is this what they look like? Hetty peered at the display. She cocked her head as she considered it. Maybe, she said. Yes, that could very much be a match. But you must remember I only saw it once and then briefly. That's been a big help, Trig said. If they're using Pricksum blasters, then we should be able to come up with a defense. Hetty's face lit up hearing this. Really? You think you might be able to? I'd like to hope so, Trig said. You've given hope to me and my people. I pray you find your own as well, Hetty said. End of chapter. Children of the Gun, Chapter 4 out of 14, written by Cypher. Dust leapt up and swirled around the ship as it settled down on the broad, flat plains. Metal popped and creaked as it cooled down in the early morning sunlight. Gases vented from the underbelly now that the ship was no longer in space. A door whooshed open and 2 small metal steps extended. Hetty stood at the door and looked out on the world overberth with wondering eyes. Trig stood behind her. Scanners didn't show any hostiles in the area, Trig said. How far are we from your village? Not far, maybe, Hetty said, glancing around to get her bearings. Maybe half a day's journey, or less. She stepped out of the ship, and Trig followed. Diego and Jimbo were right behind, loading down the heavy packs. They felt the dirt compress under their thick-soled boots as they stepped onto the new world. Dee, you and Jumbo set up camp. I'm going to go with Eddie and meet the locals, Trig said. What about Lee and Cal? Jimbo said. What about them? They got the ship, then they know their jobs, Trig said. I'll be back for dinner. Eddie and Trig headed off to the trees huddled in the distance. Why does he get to go into town while we are pitching the tents? Jimbo asked. Diego turned and looked at him. I'm here because I'm not friendly with the customers. You're here because you're an arsehole. Eddie led Trig through the woods. The undergrowth became denser and more tangled the further in they went. Eddie was making better time than Trig, who would find himself wrapped up in the creeping vine or in danger of turning an ankle over an exposed root every other step. How the hell could the Lepaks make it to your village through all of this? Trig asked. They are a terrible enemy, Eddie said, but they have not yet made it to our village. At least, they hadn't when I left. The few survivors who took in from the other villages told of how the Lepaks would tear down the bushes and uproot the trees to get to the village. They told stories of thinking the whole world was crashing down upon their heads. Yeah, I could see that, Trig said, after a solid half an hour of walking through the dense foliage, creating his path. Trig stepped into a clearing and saw Eddie looking up and smiling. We're here, Eddie said. Trig looked up at a dozen small homes woven throughout the connecting trees. He caught sight now and then of Eddie's people climbing and walking and running through the village far above his head. The forest floor beneath the village was cleared of all undergrowth, and there was only a soft carpet of dead leaves and pine needles. At the very edge of hearing, Trig thought he could hear out conversations. A small crowd wandered out of the trees. One of the fuzzy aliens with a graying fur stepped forward and said, Laria Dohotaka, you return. Eddie smiled and rushed to him. She threw her arms around his neck and cried into his shoulder. She said, "Yes, Papa, I'm home." She let out a string of trills and whistles that was the Tychlan's native language. The rest of the Tychlans watched the reunion. After a few moments, Ellie pulled back and pointed to Trig. "I've brought help," she said. "This is Trig. He has a team with him and they will save us from the Lepax." "Whoa," Trig said. "We'll see what we can do about it, but I don't want to get your hopes up." The old Tychlan hobbled forward and stood in front of Trig, who knelt down to look at him in the eye. "We respect you," he said, "for trying." "Thank you, sir," Trig said. "Your people should prepare to evacuate just the same. It's better to be prepared." "Wise," the old man said. He turned to Eddie and spoke a meandering tune of Tychlan. "Papa never learned much human tongue," Eddie said. "He wants you to know that although we are not fighters, we are proud people. He says we will only run as a last resort and that we are depending on your team to succeed." Trig looked from Eddie to her father and back. "Does he understand the danger? That we are not an army. We could save the people but still lose their home." Eddie translated into a singing language, and her father looked to Trig and gave a single curt nod downwards. Then he turned and led the crowd back towards the village. That evening, the Tychlan village hosted the human mercenaries at a feast. The torches of the perimeter of the village went liquid golden hue to the scene. The Tychlans brought out plates heaped with vegetables and sauces. The humans, however, passed on the trays of steamed insects that passed from hand to hand. Jimbo sat surrounded by Tychlans laughing and eating and drinking. He looked around at the fur-covered aliens and saw hope in their faces and felt ashamed. He stared down at his plate of greens and found his appetite deserting him. Diego watched Jimbo pick at his food. The village party was part of the job Diego suffered through quietly, but he took solace knowing that Jimbo was suffering too. The night wore on as the smoke and laughter climbed up into the cool night air. Trig watched at the feast and felt sadness at what was sure to come. End of chapter. And that, my friends, concludes this dose of science fiction fun. I hope that you enjoyed. And if you did, please don't forget to support the author from the link down below. But if you want to support this channel, there are links as well down below for you to help with. But the easiest way would be to share this video. And if you are so inclined, subscribe as well. I will see you all in the next episode, and I hope that you all have a fantastic time until then. Cheers.